I hope I won't keep you too long. There are 2 or 3 matters I just want to raise with you, and maybe you might have a question or two for me, and that would be it. First and foremost, I want to start by saying that I have been early in my response to the president, who indicated that there might be possibilities for members of the parliament to try and find common ground on this matter of the overflowing criminal conduct that's taking place in Trinidad and Tobago by a small minority of our population, but large enough to create this discomfort for all of us who live here. Every one of us would know something about this crime situation and how it's affecting us personally, family, community, nationwide. So I wouldn't go into the detail of the effects of crime and criminality in Trinidad and Tobago, except to say that as the government, we have a responsibility to mobilize the state's resources within the laws of Trinidad and Tobago that were crafted and enacted to treat with criminal conduct. It's not a free-for-all. We can't just do as we please. Even in treating with criminals, we are having to work within the confines of the law. And we also do not have limitless resources. We don't have a police officer to stand by every gate. We have approximately 8,000 police officers, and when you extract who is on leave, who is at home after 4 o'clock, and so on, and of course, after how many people are out doing their own private business, you don't have more than maybe 3 or 4 police officers out there at any one time on the job. So these are some of the limitations and the realities of it. But when I was invited to take part outside of the parliament, because it is in the parliament where members from different political persuasions come together over the crafting of bills, the amending of bills, the raising of perspectives, changing laws that exist, and so on. But even as we talk about meeting outside of the parliament, I was quite open to that. And I mean, this is nothing new for me. You may recall that when I became Prime Minister in 2015, one of the first things I did was to ask for and did meet with the opposition leader then, in the hope that there could have been some kind of a common ground where we would meet, or have our people meet on matters before we get to the parliament floor on matters. That did not indicate to me that anything useful could have come out of that because of how that went, how it was received. Because unfortunately, for some people, everything is about politics. And maybe that shouldn't be surprising, because it's the political arena in which we get political authority and governmental authority. So the politics tends to want to supersede sometimes even common sense. And that situation didn't get very far because of how it was received and how it was dealt with. But on this occasion, I thought maybe we could try again and see if we can, in the face of criminals knocking on doors in the country and attacking people in the streets and in their homes and so on, that some people might have changed their position. And if there was a chance for that to happen, then we should give that chance an opportunity. So, as the government, I took the lead in offering to the opposition a possible arrangement that we could have, which is that we could have teams of 4 people who would meet and bring to that group of 8 whatever you think might be worthy of discussion, and we will discuss it there and see what can advance from there. I did that as Prime Minister. I named 4 senior people in the cabinet, if you want to call it that, the 4 ministers, and of course 8 people coming together. There has to be some kind of a convener who will organize the meetings, call people together, make sure that the resources are available, make sure the timing is there, make sure everything is in place. And I appointed the Attorney General to organize this approach of 4 people from the government, 4 from the opposition, with the organizing person being the Attorney General. And this seems to have offended the opposition, because the opposition took the position that unless the Prime Minister is there, nothing can happen. Well, I don't subscribe to that, and I will not be subscribing to that. I am not the government. The government is the institutions and the officers of state, and once I put responsible officers there, it was going to be a discussion of different views. And the main views that we wanted to discuss were those views that were raised before when we couldn't find common ground. And that common ground was largely among legislation that had already come to the Parliament. But of course, there was a greater opening, even for matters that didn't come to the Parliament. So we meet to talk about these things, and in a civilized way, we could have probably come up with something. I saw today one of the newspapers saying the following, that both the PNM and the UNC formed teams for those anti-crime talks. Well, I think the paper that printed that, I know the PNM put forward a team. I don't know that the UNC put forward any team. The opposition leader took the position that she wrote me a letter, and that letter was all about that letter. And until I reply onto the letter, she would have no part of it. That's the fact. If you know about a UNC team, maybe you didn't publish that anyway. I can call the names of the people in the PNM team that I identified, and the Attorney General to lead the group, which should have been the PNM team and the opposition team. So this talk about the 2 parties named teams, that is news to me. My understanding is that there was a PNM team named to have these talks. There was no UNC response of any team named to take part. As a matter of fact, the Attorney General, who was authorized to call the group together and to get the talks going, actually wrote to the opposition leader indicating that we were ready to meet with her team. Whether it's led by her or not, doesn't matter. But we were ready, and of course we got no response. What we got was a lot of bombast and personal attacks on the members of our team, and of course personality. The usual situation where personalities supersede situations and institutions, and nothing has happened with that. I've seen a lot of calls for both opposition and government to behave and come together, because so much is riding on this meeting and coming together. Ladies and gentlemen, stop fooling ourselves. That is just a palliative of oratory. Criminals who are sitting down when the night come and bring out the guns that they acquire to go out there and try to frighten and kill people to make a living of criminal conduct will not stop what they're doing because I am talking to somebody or somebody's talking to me. But there is value in the officers of state and the Parliament being able to talk with the hope that we could find common ground to make changes or to introduce action that would give the state's interests greater strength in dealing with those who choose crime and criminality as their activity. So the government cannot pass that responsibility to other people who choose not to participate in talks. The government has to continue to function in using the resources of the state, the parameters of the law, and try to ensure that the criminal conduct is suppressed and those who engage in criminal activity are identified and held accountable. The government could not, under any circumstance, do anything else but that, whether other people agree with us or not, or join us or not. That is governmental responsibility. And the government of Trinidad and Tobago has been carrying out government duties. Of course, given the upsurge and sustained criminal assault that we've been under, which I should say is not peculiar only to our country, it's the time we live in. Availability of firearms, availability of people who believe that, they don't have to go and work 14 days and wait for a fortnight pay packet. These are the kinds of things that we're dealing with today. It's a completely unacceptable shift in responsibilities. And of course, terrorizing the entire community by these wanton acts of violence, invariably using arms and ammunition. So when it is said that the government should do something about crime, that gives the impression that nothing is being done. Or as some high-ranking officer in the private sector would say, go after Mr. Big. Well, I don't know, what does that mean? These are fanciful positions. If there is a big person who is breaking the law involved in crime or human trafficking, big or small, as far as I'm aware, they are exposed to police action. There's no pass being given to anybody because you are Mr. Big or Mr. Small. And then, of course, the ridiculous level it comes down to in the general discourse, maybe out of frustration, is when the opposition leader says, well, these people who are using firearms and guns and getting involved in criminality in the country, could it be that they're being protected by the government? What a ridiculous statement. Especially when that statement comes after crime talks. That is part of the crime talks. That criminals are being protected by the government, and the crime talks are meant to tease that out to find out if that is so. I'll have more to say about that later today, but not now. The bottom line is, we on the government side moved with alacrity to get a team together to meet our opposition colleagues to talk about matters relating to crime. We said both sides would put in what we think should be discussed or the issues that should attract our attention. We listed a number of legislative matters which we believe had already been raised but had not been getting opposition support. We listed those. The opposition leader wrote a many-page article to me with all kinds of platform speeches in it, and in it they had some issues that they would have raised. So fine, if these are the things that you think, well, let's go and talk about it. We never got to that stage because really the opposition doesn't really want any abatement of this crime. As a matter of fact, I think they're very happy that their expectation has come to pass. Because every time we've been in the parliament to try to do anything that could have some kind of dampening effect on crime in the country, we could never get their support. There always is some excuse. The classic one being the anti-bail bill. That bail bill was meant to make bail a little less available and to slow down the revolving door that criminals use to have more time to attack the population. When we were in the opposition, that bill was in committee. And we in the opposition worked with the new government assiduously, in fact took the lead in getting that bill out of committee. To the extent where, go and check the Hansard, you will see where Prime Minister Kamala Persad-Bissessar, early in her tenure, dealing with the anti-gang bill, praised Minister Imbert, Marlene MacDonald, and somebody else from the opposition for the good work that they had done in assisting the government in getting that bill out of committee. And when it came to the parliament floor, it had the full support of the opposition, and it remained in force for a number of years. And the police had really asked for that, to assist them in slowing down people who, many of them, choosing criminal conduct, violent criminal conduct, as a frequent activity in their communities. If bail was not as easily available, it would have some ameliorating effect on these criminals. And it was the law of the land. It had a sunset clause on it, meaning it's not a permanent law as we go forward. It would last for a certain period of time. And if you want it to go on longer, it has to come back to the parliament and have that life extended. The minute the UNC lost the election, they who had this arrangement in place, supported by the opposition, suddenly found that this law had no value because it had not done anything for crime management in the country, and resolutely refused to support the bill in the parliament. That's what they did. But let me take you back to something. Before crime became the premier issue in this country for our daily conversation, what was the conversation as far as government performance was concerned? It was health. It was the delivery of health care in this country. That was the main issue. So when we came out of the elections of 2015, very early, we appointed a committee to look at healthcare delivery in Trinidad and Tobago, chaired by Dr. Welsh, the Welsh Committee. That committee produced 2 documents on that subject of examination of healthcare delivery in the country. So important was it, we took it to the parliament and we sent it to a joint select committee, just like the anti-gang bill. But a joint select committee requires government, opposition, and independence. Healthcare delivery never functioned in a joint select committee. You know why? Because the opposition, the very same people who took the position of not supporting anti-crime legislation, after all they were saying about health and absence of proper health care in the country, flatly refused to appoint any person from their parliamentary team to create a joint select committee, even to consider the Welsh Committee report. And when asked, why this intransigence? They said, we don't need that. All of a sudden they didn't need it. But before, it was health, 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 trouble, 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 hospital, hospital, hospital. That was it. So I'm not surprised by any of this. Talks, talks, talks. You want talks, you want talks, you want talks. And the government appoint 4 people to be the government team. The government appoint the Attorney General to be the convener. And you find reason not to participate. But managing to get people in the country to respond to the problems and the pressures of the criminals by saying, well, we are under this pressure because no crime talks taking place. And of course, the opposition has their own crime talks. And what comes out of it? One would have thought that they had proposals to make to the government and say to the government, you should be doing this, you should be doing no crime talks. 2 points came out of their crime talks. 1, solution, number 1, state of emergency. Well, if that was going to be your proposal, you didn't need no crime talks. You could have told us that a long time. You could have saved us the trouble of thinking that you had something useful to say. But I have said before, they have nothing useful to add. So when forced to add something, state of emergency. Ladies and gentlemen, anybody who was in this country between 2010 and now would have had first-hand experience of 2 things. 1 is a state of emergency as a crime-fighting tool. And you would have seen the abject failure of that approach. And 2, you would have seen our economy battered by 2 years of a pandemic. The economy of this country had been shut down for almost 2 years. It reached a point where the government was feeding people who couldn't feed themselves, people who had jobs one day and next day they were virtually destitute. Now that we have rebuilt the economy and we are getting back on our feet, those who actually carried out a state of emergency to fight crime is prescribing that to handcuff and manacle the local economy with a failed approach. And you know what is painful about this? They know exactly what they're doing. Because you see, when state of emergency was deemed by a government to be the way to respond to violent criminal conduct, the government went out, picked up people who they suspected were involved in crime or who they knew were involved, and just heaped people up based on anecdotal stories, picked up about 8,000 people and put them in jail. Charged them, some of them were charged. Ignoring the fact that even as government, if you are going to go after anybody for criminal conduct in this country, there's the little thing called evidence. Because there's going to be a place and a time where you, the government, will have to produce the evidence that was used to restrain these people. And that was done. Pick up people without evidence, take them and say you're fighting crime in state of emergency. The end result of that was a fleet of lawsuits against the state by some of the very people who were thought to be the root of the criminal problem in the country. And in the absence of appropriate justiciable evidence to prevail in the court, these people suddenly had a supply of state money to buy more guns because they kept winning the cases. Only last week, one of those people won $100,000. Before that, some won $250,000, some won $280,000. I think one won $400,000, something like that. Taxpayers' money. And this is just the payment to the so-called criminals. I am not talking about the lawyers and their fees, because every single case involves legal representation from the state. So a huge amount of millions was spent responding to the misadventure of the government. And you know something? Some of those cases never had a chance to be won by the state, because the Attorney General, who would have been sued by these criminals or alleged criminals, would have had to present in the court one particular defense. And the defense was, why did the government call a state of emergency? Now, the government personnel who did that were required to put in an affidavit to the court saying what was the basis for the state of emergency, so that the court could see that it wasn't just capricious dictatorial action. Two people, one of whom is still now here advocating state of emergency. Opposition leader was then Prime Minister, and of course Anand Ramlogan, who was Attorney General. They were required to put in an affidavit to the court to tell the court the basis for the state of emergency that these people were complaining about, where their rights were abridged and infringed. You know what happened? The two public officials who did that, when the lawsuit started to flow and evidence was required in the way I just mentioned, they just flatly refused to put in an affidavit in defense of the state's action which they generated to fight crime in this country. Knowing that if they did that, it will allow taxpayers' money If they didn't cooperate with the state case, taxpayers' money would flow to the criminals. That's exactly what happened. So excuse me today if I see them for what they are, just trying to play politics with a very difficult situation in this country, where, like many other places in the world, we are experiencing a serious upsurge of criminal activity, requiring a whole-of-government approach, and receiving it in Trinidad and Tobago, because there's precious little more we can do resource-wise. But there are people in this country who are prospering from criminal conduct, and one can sometimes get the impression that the systems are operating in their favor, because there are limitations to what the government can do. Because once someone is held by the police, the government makes sure the police is funded, the government makes sure the police is, their recruits there, that there's police action where criminals are attempting to persuade their friends to go after the population. We have a police service. Might not be the best in the world. It is not as successful as it should be against the criminal, but that's what we have. That's what we have to use. That's what the law allows. And as we do that, we expect that there are other arms of the state that will do what they have to do. And together, we will bring the criminals to the heel. But if all the arms are not operating in sync, there will be instances where the criminals will feel that they're getting the upper hand of us. Because clearly, you would have seen yesterday, or recently, there was a shooting 20 years ago in this country. 20 years ago, a shooting. That case was only concluded last week. And you can only ask, what kind of system is that allows a shooter to know that if he gets caught, it will take 20 years for that to come to an end. And of course, my lawyer will be telling the court, when it does come up, asking the witness, how do you know that what you're saying now about what happened 10 years ago is really what actually happened? And you know, by the time you examine who's wearing the shoe with the correct lacing, and who buttered the bread with the right knife and which side of the loaf, and all that done, chances are the perpetrator walks. And of course, we have been working relentlessly to ensure that we improve the police service, because we cannot ask the teachers or the priests or the nurses to fight crime. Fighting crime is done through our security services. I read the list of things coming out of the crime talks last Monday, and I was shocked to see that one of them was a question where it was being asked whether our offshore patrolling is up to standard. By people who give away our OPVs, collect the money, disappear it, telling us that crime fighting is not to be done in the seas, to be done on land. And of course, over time, it built up to the point where we had a serious invasion of migrants from abroad, including criminal migrants. This government had to deal with that. Didn't happen overnight. These things grow, they evolve. We now put in place serious quality offshore patrol vessels in response to that. We now put contract in place to maintain the 12 diamond vessels that they bought and didn't pay for. And your big point in the crime talks is whether in fact you can be satisfied that there are good offshore patrolling taking place. This government has been doing and has done and continues to do what the government is expected to do in all the components of crime fighting. But there's much more to be done. That much we can understand. But in every area, the government is there, our state machinery is there. One of the big problems we have is the amount of time and resources that we have to spend taking people who are unsuitable out of the security services. It's a pity we can only do that once every 5 years to the parliament. But the security services are at work every day attempting to clean up the police services, where too many people are in there putting the service itself at risk. But the government doesn't give up. We just do what has to be done. Look at the frequency with which the population is regaled with stories about criminal action coming from the police service. I'll have more to say about that tonight. So, let me just conclude by saying, when you do your commentary about government and opposition meeting, don't conflate the government with the opposition. The government was always and is always ready to meet in a civilized way with any opposition. Our team has been there now for a long time. We found no partner from the opposition. And I think it is quite incorrect for it to be said in the newspaper that both the PNM and the UNC put teams out and there's some mystery why the teams can't meet. The opposition just flatly refused to participate in a civil way with a team from the government, attempting to dictate to the government who should represent the government, and making the most degrading statements about members of government who are serving in this country, who are willing and on standby to meet with their parliamentary colleagues. I'll leave that there for now. The other point I want to raise is this question of reform of our constitution. It has been a phrase that has been around for quite some time, and it cannot be said that attempts were not made to reform our constitution. 1976 did see some significant change in our constitution of 62. You had the Patrick Manning government in his last term had appointed the Hamid Ghani group, a group led by Hamid Ghani, to look at it, and they discussed the whole question of an executive president. That was the main topic and point in that one. And then under the UNC, you had the Prakash Ramada group, where I think a lot of it being in the middle of an election season at that time, discussed and produced some element of proportional representation as our election mode and model and so on. But today I want to advise the country that in a season like this, in our 61st year, and given the number of persons who have been expressing a willingness to see some return to our constitution, with the hope that we could upgrade it, amend it, introduce new points, evaluate it, evaluate the components, not all or some, as the case might be, that now is an appropriate time for us to do that. It is not to be the government taking the lead or the political party that I lead taking the lead. What I proposed to the cabinet today and got cabinet's approval is to appoint an advisory committee to formulate terms of reference for a national consultation on constitutional reform for for Trinidad and Tobago to engage citizens and stakeholders in Trinidad and Tobago and the diaspora in a national consultation. What Cabinet approved was an advisory committee to formulate the terms of reference and to make recommendations to Cabinet within 3 months of its appointment for the promoting and convening of a national constitutional conference and consultation in June of 2024, taking into consideration the diverse nature of our national society, its historical evolution, and the progress made in nationhood since attaining independence and republican status and matters related thereto. The National Advisory Committee shall incorporate within its proposed terms of reference outline parameters of subject matter for national debate and for the engagement of the widest cross-section of persons and bodies representing the citizenry, including the diaspora, political parties, NGOs, commercial interests, religious interests, labor, trade union interests, educators and students, with a view to promoting meaningful consultations, debate and engagement in the offering and exchange of opinions and the making of recommendations for reform of our Constitution in Trinidad and Tobago. This National Advisory Committee is to comprise 7 experienced citizens of distinction with a wealth of knowledge, representative of the diverse ethnic, cultural, and religious nature of Trinidad and Tobago society. I, in careful consideration, selected and did get the agreement of the following persons to serve on this committee. Mr. Barendra Sinanan, State Council, Senior Counsel, as Chairman. You will recall Mr. Sinanan is a Speaker of the House. He's a very eminent attorney. He served as Speaker of the House. I think he was also a Member of Parliament for San Fernando at one stage, and carries with him a wealth of experience that will allow him to chair this committee. Number 2, Dr. Terence Farrell, who is a former governor of the Central Bank, and he's an economist by profession, and I think also a lawyer. And he did have a number of assignments and has been in the public eye for very many years on this matter and many other matters related and incidental thereto. Mr. Ray Sandy, who has recently retired from a very senior position in Tobago House of Assembly, Chief Administrator in the Tobago House of Assembly, very familiar with the issues that arose and evolved in Tobago in the last few decades. Ms. Jackie Samson Miguel, who has just retired after a long, distinguished and meritorious service as Clerk of the House of Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago. She too is an attorney, but with very long experience in the management of things parliamentary, and has managed the affairs and lives of parliamentarians for a long time. Mr. Winston Rudder, who is a very eminent public servant, retired as permanent secretary, and today, having worked at home and abroad, worked for some time with international agencies abroad, is back home now, and is chairing the Public Service Commission. And Mr. Nizam Mohammed, who is a very eminent lawyer, Haji Nizam Mohammed. He also served as a Member of Parliament for a number of years and did serve as Speaker of the House of Representatives and continues to be very involved in the interests of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And Ms. Heyman Narayan Singh, who is a senior person at a corporate body, Ernst & Young, in Port of Spain, a young person who is an attorney as well, accountant. Yeah, she's an accountant, and very well positioned to bring a perspective of younger people and those in the corporate area. Now, remember, these are not people being asked to craft a constitution. They're simply being asked to facilitate and advance a national discourse on the subject, and to be the sounding board, the post office into which any and all interested parties, agencies, organizations would want to put their views to this facilitatory advisory committee. Once that is done within the 3-month period, then this team, which will get all the resources from the Ministry of Public Administration, they will get legal support, they'll get clerical support, technical support, research support, to be able to collate and distill what they can extract from. And they will also be facilitated to conduct open consultations with people who will want to talk to them directly over and above the memoranda that they'll put in. They'll be able now to present a draft document which will become the working document for the Constitutional Conference in June, where we move to a point where we can put some face and bone and muscle identification to what exactly do we mean by reform of the Constitution. What needs to be reformed? What is the population saying? The various components of the population saying should be reformed, and what should that reform be? What should come out? What should go in? What should be twisted? What should be lifted? So that's what they will do. Collate this national perspective, this national narrative, which they will encourage for these 3 months. And then we expect to get a document out of that. This is what is being said by the country. These are the things that are irking people. These are the things that they're expecting to be dealt with. And then we go to this conference to see how we can codify that in a way that could take us to parliamentary intervention. And of course, that is where the I agree, I don't agree will be weighed. In one hand, or say, as you said, in some people on the one hand, you had some, on the other hand, you had that. But I know we all are not going to be on the same page. We all will not be saying the same thing, because that constitution does different things to different people and mean different things to different people. So what we expect would be a basket of proposals from people, right? Because each person believes that what is bothering them is the most important thing. But there are a number of things bothering a lot of people. So there will be a number of proposals, and we anticipate that this would be a very lively debate and discourse. But the end result of it is that we got to get to a place where we'll say, okay, this is what we have agreement on. This is what we have majority support for. And now, do we have the will to make the changes that are required? We are now in our 61st year as an independent nation. Everybody could tell you about something that is not going right. And invariably, a lot of correction to that thing could be described as required to be coming from changes in the Constitution. So the government would facilitate this in this way, starting from today, because the cabinet approved this. So the next week or two, these people will be off and running with the exercise. So stand by to make your contribution. We want it to be very participatory. Don't be shy. This is when it will be done. All we ask is to be civil with your fellow countrymen and women. Let's see what we can come up with. Let's identify in the most realistic way our Constitution and how we live with it and how we could improve it to serve us better. That's what it's all about. I know we could have picked 7 different people or 70 different people. That is not really what it's about. So let's not spend the time trying to microanalyze these 7 people as to who should and shouldn't have been there. They are simply facilitators, and they have what it takes to facilitate and encourage and guide. That's what they're there to do. It is what you put into the conversation. It is what you put into your memoranda that will be the substance of the Constitutional Conference, where we meet to say we are willing to look at our Constitution and we are willing to identify areas of weakness if they exist and to propose actions to strengthen it, and hope that the political arena will have within it people with the mettle and the fortitude to make the changes that the circumstances say are required. And we're off and running on that now, and I hope that at the end of the day, I could stand before you again like this and say, we have made progress, or we are making progress. The last thing I want to mention is that tomorrow we go to the Parliament, and on that day, the Lynch report on Paria would be laid in the Parliament tomorrow by the Minister of Energy. So if you have any questions, I will take a few of them now. Yes, Joe.
Good afternoon.
Identify yourself, please. You're in Whitehall, you know.
Drew Brown, TV6 News. You wished us the best for the new year, so I wish you be very safe.
Thank you very much.
Just wondering, in terms of the issue of the state of emergency, you were clear in terms of, in 2011, the issue of that process of the use of the Anti-Gang Act. When you hear people calling for it now, is the government's position now the issue of not a state of emergency in general, or in terms of how it has to be approached, if ever that has to be done?
The government has been looking at all options all along the way, and we do not believe that a state of emergency is something that is our best option at this time, because there are a number of downsides to it, not the least of which we would want to do nothing to disrupt the economic recovery that we have been working towards and hoping to experience more going forward. You see, all of us are exposed to the criminal element. But if all of us spend all our time on that, or let that be the be-all and end-all in this country, or we panic ourselves into making decisions as was made in 2011, then we would be doing ourselves an injustice. We believe that we can fight the criminals, we are fighting the criminals, and we can allow our economy to not be beaten down by the actions of the criminals, by making decisions like a state of emergency, which would not really get to the root cause of the criminality. Right? That's the government's position. So we are not advancing a state of emergency as our response to crime. I could tell you, we've looked at our friends in Jamaica who use state of emergency by parishes. Some of those parishes have as many people as about a quarter of Trinidad. And if they put 2 or 3 parishes together, it's like about half, 3/4 of Trinidad, depending on where they are. It did not bring about the desired effect of rooting out violent gun crime and criminality in Jamaica. As a matter of fact, all the criminals they shift their operations from one place to another. So the state of emergency kept spreading from one place to another behind them. Today in Jamaica, they're pretty much experiencing the same thing that we are experiencing. An inordinately high level of violent crime, where the numbers early in the new year is almost like it was last year. Because what has been put at the criminals have not deterred them to the effect that we have yet seen any significant deterrence. But you have to bear in mind that this does not mean a uselessness of the security services. Because had they not been doing what they have been doing and getting some measure of success, the situation would have been far worse. It is bad enough that you have 33 murders in one country like that, and we have, what, 20 here already for the year? But ask yourself, had we not been on the job, pushing back at the criminal component of our nation, what would that number have been? So, the idea of saying a state of emergency will give us this and will give us that, especially coming from people who know what they're telling us, is not true. Because they know what they did and they know what the outcome was. I mean, you tell me, you make a whole hoopla about crime talks, and the Prime Minister not coming to have crime talks with you, and you're going to have your own crime talks in your own party and your own amalgam, and you and your partner can't agree on the same thing. If you can't agree on it with it in your own house, you agree with it outside, and you expect me to agree with it. And then, out of the crime talks comes state of emergency on one hand, on the other hand, declare all criminals terrorists and wipe them out as terrorists. No, that is not a realistic arrangement. But remember, that proposal is coming from a former commissioner of police who is now a politician, who could tell you, watch you straight in the face and tell you that 2 people who were killed in police custody died because they fall off a chair. Right? So we have to understand what is serious governance and what is stupid talk. Understand? The government doesn't have the luxury of talking stupidness. The government has to talk something that makes sense and act with something that makes sense within the laws of Trinidad and Tobago. Because whether you like it or not, painful or not, we start off our treatment with another citizen as the authority in Trinidad and Tobago with something called rights. And the government does not have it within its power to eliminate rights in treating even with criminals, even when they're in the jail. So when you get that as the high point of the crime talks, you know that there's no distinction between crime talk and old talk on that side.
I'm just wondering, for the new year, in terms of new legislation to specifically deal with issues, let's say, regarding gun violence, anything you could tell the population?
The Attorney General, who is here with me this evening, very soon will indicate what legislative attempts we will make with respect to amendments or introduction of new laws that we believe might contribute not only to crime but other aspects of national development.
I yield to my colleagues. The special vetted units for the police service. Any update on that? And the other part of the question in terms of while you deal with things like back pay and so on, but the overall pay structure of the police service, is that something that will be examined going forward as well?
Well, let me take the first part. You said
Special investigation.
Yes, work has progressed with that. We have made some progress. We are working very closely with the United States authorities. As a matter of fact, a team from Trinidad and Tobago is leaving for Washington. I'm leading that team next on the 28th. We go into the United States to have a 2-day session, a series of sessions with a number of United States officials who are important to us in matters of this and other nature. So a lot of work is going on with that. We are fortunate we have an ambassador who works very closely with us now and is very eager to help us over some hurdles. So we're happy with that. Within the police service, we are trying to strengthen the police service by ensuring that we have more and more people who are trustworthy, because that really is one of our problems. The criminals start off before the gun is fired on this race. They were ahead of the police in preparing to use the situation. And to catch up with them, you require trustworthiness in the police service, because information is one of the major tools in crime fighting. And who has information, or who is withholding information, or who is sharing information is important in some of the strategies and methods, that you have to use in return. There is much that we can't say publicly because it's part of our tool, and those tools are required to be in confidence until sometime when they come out in the open. It's not everything you can shout about, even telling you in the media. But rest assured that the government and its agencies are not, as some conversations imply, just sitting there and watch the criminals run riot. We need information, because it is information that generates the evidence. And that evidence, if you don't have evidence, you could know something, or you think you know something. That's not good enough if you are going to move to a prosecutorial seat. You have to have evidence. And it is that which requires the use of these vetted units and the sharing of information. The US will share information with us if they believe that our personnel are trustworthy. And that is why some developments have been frowned upon here and in some quarters abroad. And we have to improve on those situations to ensure that people with more resources share with us information and other attributes for fighting crime. We cooperate a lot because a lot of the negatives that come to us from outside. We don't make guns here, we don't make ammunition here. A lot of the human trafficking starts outside. We've had an uncomfortable number of instances of hardened criminals from abroad coming into Trinidad and Tobago. I can mention to you now, there are elements of local organized crime that is very troubling to us here. But we work at it to eradicate it without screaming. And we also have to bear in mind that when you apprehend people, they pass into another jurisdiction, the judiciary. And this is where we have had some cause for disappointment in that justice is not dispensed with the speed that the crime is dispensed with, for all kinds of reasons. And as a government, we have done a number of things which we must talk about to try to facilitate the speeding up of justice when things happen, because you can't prosecute before it happens. That's one of the keys to the whole arrangement of our jurisprudence. I can't read your mind and say, I look at your face, you look like a man who's going to go and commit a crime tonight to arrest you now. I mean, you have some element of suspicion, but that could only take you so far. When you apprehend people to solve a crime, you have to have evidence, and that evidence, the quality of the evidence, sometimes is reflected by the quality of your service. So you have to have a good police service, and we keep working at that all along, because we must admit that the criminals got the jump on the country, because we keep trying to bring the police service up to speed and our security service up to speed. The criminals seem to be up to speed all the time, right? You wonder how it is that there's so much accuracy in their shooting. It's because they practice. People without being on a payroll anywhere, armed, guns cost money, and of course they use it to get more money, to terrorize the population. And if you aren't in the street, they believe they can come in your house and get it, because people like me, I have no doubt in my own mind that some of those criminals, some of them, not all, some of them, would have thought twice about the action that they would have taken had they been convinced that the consequences would have been real, would have been harsh, and would be in short order. But as government, we are limited to what we can do. The Police Service Commission, independent body, will assist and identify to the Parliament to have someone hired as Commissioner of Police. Mightn't be your favorite, mightn't be his favorite, but the bottom line is that is the person who for a period of time is required to run the police service. I don't think it helps to try to get yourself in the news every night by shouting down everything negative about the Commissioner of Police. She needs our support. If it was a he needs our support, because the situation is that is the person that we've put there to do that job. And if that person is not going to get our assistance, and all the person gets is denigration from those, let me just say this, because I need to say it. When the Commissioner Earl Christopher finds herself being ridiculed on a political platform by Johnny Abraham, it rots my gut. Because I want to tell Mr. Abraham, he is not the only person who knows about crime and criminality in this country. And if I were him, I will shut my mouth. And I say no more for the moment, but I'll wait to say some more. It's people like that who have us where we are today. And it really is people like that who have us where we are today. Had we not had people like that in the police service, maybe we never would have been where we are today. So don't complain for me any solution. And tonight I will talk about the politicians who have us where we are today. And coming and telling you about they have solutions when you are part of the blasted problem. Any more questions?
Good day, Janelle D'Souza from Newsday. You mentioned during the previous SOE to fight against crime that some of the criminals and the lawsuits that they brought against the state, now they won and they're using that money to, to continue their criminal activities. So has there also been any evidence or any suggestions of the gang members getting contracts, state contracts, and also using that as for their criminal activities?
I have no doubt that there are instances where people involved in organizing gangs would have got themselves contracts here and there, but there's no government policy to give criminals gangs. I mean, people have got public service jobs and they became criminals after, People have become politicians and they became criminals after, There's no government policy to surrender gangs to criminals. The criminal element is not without resourcefulness to get themselves into a position. In fact, the whole idea of having a gang in many instances is some person who has more than 2 brain cells who organize other people in a way to benefit them, using other people either as employees or as foot soldiers to do what they want done. And if work is going on and there's criminal element present as they are, they sometimes go out there and threaten people who get work in the normal, healthy way, shake down contractors, would burn the equipment, would even come and kill people on the site. All of that is to send a message that if you don't do what I want, this is what's going to happen. And some people acquiesce to it. Some people go away from it. Some people try to fight it, and some of them pay a price for trying to fight it. Because what we're dealing with are decisions made by people who look to see what could and would work for them. And those people who make a decision to get involved in crime for profit in particular, they can't go to the police station and say, well, look, I'm involved in this crime and this man owe me money and therefore he's not paying me and the policeman. No, no, no. There's a lot of street violence to settle business arrangements, fight for turf. These are all components of the criminal basket of undesirables. And therefore, what we have to be sure that the government is not, and I can tell you, the government has no policy to hand government contracts to criminals. But I'll be fooling you if I tell you that criminals are in different parts of the country, no particular part, have got themselves in a situation. You know what I saw one day? I was going down past the old Central Bank, and I saw this crowd on the pavement. I was a minister of government then, and I asked, what is this about? And my driver told me, those people on this side are going to get their pay from URP. And these people on the side over there are waiting to collect money from them. And in some instances, the person who is collecting the check is only getting a small portion of the money. Most of the money is going to the person who is standing on the other side. Now, what do? Do we shut down URP? Because another time, I saw a similar situation and was told that there were people cashing their pension checks. And there were other people who were threatening them and taking away either some or all that money. And I happen to have first-hand information because as an MP, people came to me to tell me, the very first time I came face-to-face with this home invasion thing, this is the old man who came to me to complain. He's someone from the East there. He had a house. And he eventually was the only person in the house because his wife died and he had no children. And young men from the community came into the house and took over the house and put him in the back room and literally had him in custody while he was using his house as theirs. So there are people in our society who will do those things. And we have all to understand that these people who do these things didn't come from Mars. Many of them are the brothers, boyfriends, husbands, cousins, neighbors of people who know what is going on. And they either turn a blind eye to it, or they are afraid to tell the authorities about it, so that some authority could be brought to bear on the injustice. These are all the complexities of our society. So let us not tell ourselves that there's one thing to do, a switch, to flick that switch and the light goes on or it goes off. Or tell the government, do something about it, do something about that. There's something. We're always trying to do it. But it usually requires certain pathways that are allowed and allowable. The government cannot get itself engaged in illegalities as some advice we're getting now. Anybody with a gun, call them a terrorist and wipe them out. Or call them a cockroach and stamp on them. You can't run a country like that. And that, no policy like that is working anywhere, except where the rule of law doesn't exist. Right? We have to strengthen and improve our security services. We're taking steps, for example, right now we're recruiting people into the police service under a more strict and stringent arrangement, trying to ensure up front that those who get into the service at least give you a fighting chance of being a quality officer. And by the same token, the corollary is those who are in there and who are standing in the way of success and, of course, engaging in criminal activity and other deleterious actions, you get them out. But of course, you know, there's tremendous protection for people in this country where jobs are concerned. You can't just say you're vexed with somebody and they lose their job, or they do something. Sometimes they do some terrible things, but you can't just get up and say, get out the job. We have processes to follow, procedures, and usually those processes and procedures, if you're not careful, you might come to a conclusion that they are more weighted in favor of those who are perpetrators and who are responsible for the infraction, because you seem to get the sympathy going in that direction with precious little sympathy for the victim who actually experience the horror of a person who decides to prey on them. So we have to be real about what we're doing. And we do have some good people at work. Otherwise, while we are traumatized by the 600 people who were killed, we also must take note that there were people who put their lives on the line to take away almost 1,000 guns from people last year. Don't forget that. Because the people who go to these armed people to take away their guns, they put their lives on the line. Sometimes they lose it. As I say that, I want to express my condolences to the family of one of my officers who is usually in the marked patrol car that takes me around sometime. I just discovered a little while ago he was killed in Spring Village last night. He went to Spring Village for some reason and was wantonly killed, because in our society there are people for whom that is a job. It's a job. They call it put on a work. How do you do that? I can't stop asking, where did these people come from? They didn't just suddenly arrive. Born and nurtured here. Except for the few South Americans who might come in now and then, these are homegrown people. And that says a lot about a lot of homes in this country. I'm an officer of state. I have a job to do. I will do the job. And the government will do the government job, because none of us come here to stay forever. Thank you all very much. I look forward to seeing you again sometime soon.